The next great empire in the Second Temple period is the Roman Empire. And the relationship between the Jews and the Romans is much, much longer and much, much more intense. We have the Hanukkah story, one great revolt, but the Jews rebel more times against the Romans than any other people in the history of the Roman Empire. Now, we saw that there was an ancient relationship between Jewish ideas and Greek ideas, going back to that relationship between Noah and his two sons, Shem and Japhet. But the relationship between Jews and Romans also goes back very early, but it goes back to a much more direct relationship, much more recent in history than the Noah's Ark story. And that's the relationship between Jacob and his brother Esau that we already looked at a long time ago. These two twins, who are twins in one hand, from the same womb, the same biological and spiritual material, but on the other hand, so incredibly different. Esau, the doer, Jacob, the thinker. Esau into the physical world, into power, and Jacob into spirituality and intellect. That relationship we see is a very difficult one early on in the book of Genesis, in the stories we see between Jacob and Esau. And the descendants of those two boys, those two twins, will turn into two nations, Israel and Rome. And even though that relationship is very uneven, and the Jews, at our greatest, was never a great empire, and Rome became the greatest empire in Western civilization, nonetheless, we say that rivalry that began long before in the story of Jacob and Esau, which was basically about control of the world, that rivalry continues all the way up until the interaction of the Jews and the Romans. And the basic personality traits of the Jews that come from Jacob are mirrored by the basic personality traits of the Romans that come from Esau. And just as those two brothers had an intense rivalry and competition in the world, and just as Rashi, our great medieval commentator, said, going back to the story of Jacob's unification with Esau, that it's a law that Esau hates Jacob, so too, when we get to the story of the Jewish interaction with Rome, we'll see that it is really the most intense interaction the Jewish people have with any people in the ancient world, and the rabbis view it as a rivalry that will continue throughout history, all the way up to the Messianic era. So we must keep in mind when looking at this period of time of Israel and Rome, that it's the backbone for an entire scenario that's going to unfold for thousands of years throughout human history, way past the Second Temple period, way past the Jewish diaspora, and all the way through to the end of days, when we have the final, I would say, settling of accounts that began with that rivalry between Jacob and Esau so many thousands of years ago.